Okay, ready? Okay, the ELOF tells us what are the skills we expect children to have by the time that they leave our program. And so it sort of tells you also the progression of those skills. And so something we want you to notice here, so just know there is a Head Start, the Early Learning Outcomes Framework. It tells you what you should expect, what are developmentally appropriate practices for children. And what I want, so this is just one section of the social emotional development. So it's like domains, subdomains. Specifically, we're talking about children, and the children, how they manage their emotions. So this is just an example. What we're looking at is for a child at 36 months, right? The expectation here when they're managing their emotions is that by 36 months, and you'll see this in the Early Learning Outcomes Framework, there's also a little sentence that comes along with it. And it says, with the support of familiar adults. So we know that what's developmentally appropriate is that they're not little adults who are going to know how to manage their emotions yet. They depend on, still yet, at this age group, some support on the support of the adult in the classroom. Now, if you're dysregulated, it's going to make it harder for you to support them to recognize their emotions. And so what we want you to know is that it is appropriate for children at this age to still need the adults to be able to co-regulate here. And so you've got to be mindful of how you're showing up, because that is going to affect how you're supporting the children to manage their emotions. Okay, so that's what we want. That's just the highlight here, that when we're talking about what's developmentally appropriate practice, it really is, and again, this is why we say you're not pointing fingers at the child, it's not the child. Everything that is happening, we're thinking about what's happening, what is the adult doing? You're the adult in the classroom, right? And so you have the ability, and so you want to be thinking about, again, what is keeping you dysregulated and keeping you from being able to support a child, because it's appropriate for them to be depending on you at this age. Same thing over here, right? For approaches to learning, in order for them to manage their actions and their behaviors, we still need, at 36 months, with the support of familiar adults, right? Before they get that, even at 60 months, they're still increasing independence, not quite independent yet, right? So they can participate in and follow everyday routines with the support of adults. They can manage short delays in getting physical needs met with the support of adults. They learn and they follow some basic rules for managing actions and behavior in familiar settings. Again, with the support of the adults. So this is why we first started off talking about the importance of you being regulated in order for you to support the children in the classroom. And so when you're thinking about responsive adult-child interactions, we want to remember that we are communicating, right? What behaviors do children use to communicate? And that we're thinking about behavior is a way for them to communicate. So what is it then? Our goal here is to think about what is it that their behavior, whether it's biting or hitting or kicking, what is it that they're trying to communicate? And that's what we want to be thinking about. So what are some of the behaviors that children use to communicate to you, that you are seeing, and to connect to their world? Yes?
Biting.
Biting. Biting, hitting, crying, tantrums, throwing, yelling, spitting, right? All of these are a form of communication, right? Crying, throwing, biting, pulling the adult, right? Trying to get your attention, smiling, right? We forgot also the positive stuff, smiling, laughing, squealing, looking away, jumping, those tantrums, clapping. Every behavior is a form of communication, and we have to remember that as adults. What they might be communicating, right? If they might be communicating that they need some help, right? If you're thinking also about a child that's very withdrawn, aren't they also communicating that they have a need, right? And so they might be telling you, maybe I'm lonely, or I'm hungry, or I'm scared. I want some time by myself, or I want to play. And so we want to remember again, children communicate through their behavior. How do you think understanding this then can help you to mitigate child incidents in your role, or even how you support your staff? How is this knowledge going to help you, knowing that all behavior is a form of communication? Yes.
Reduces your judgment of the behavior.
Love that. Reduces your judgment of the behavior. What else? Is that what
You took it.
How else is this going to help you? If I know they're just trying to communicate something, how is that going to help you as the adult?
Well, then you can build strategies for each behavior or what you're seeing,
Uh-huh.
move them accordingly. And if those strategies are successful, you can continue to use them until they're not needed, or you can reevaluate and apply new strategies.
Again, I did not pay you. Right? Yes. Right? You can really think about if it's communicating something, part of what you're trying to do is figure out what it is that they're trying to communicate, whether positive or negative. Then that'll help you think of some strategies. And again, we're not trying to control, we're just trying to support them so that we lessen the likelihood of them repeating that behavior, right? We're trying to teach them, replace it with some better ways to communicate that behavior, whether it be through words or just another behavior or action that is a little bit, that's better and not going to hurt people. Okay, so the other thing that we're going to ask you to do is do a little bit of a paradigm shift. We're always talking about challenging behaviors, kids with, right? What we're asking you to do is think about the language that we're using too, because it really is about the adults, and it's about the behaviors that challenge the adult, because not everybody has the same threshold. Again, we're not all the same when we show up to a classroom. What we can or cannot tolerate is going to be different based off of our experiences. So that's why this piece that we're asking you to do, or what we're asking you when we're talking about it, is that we're thinking about how to respond to the behaviors that challenge the adults, right? It's not about the child, it's really about responding to the behaviors. So how do we do that? Exactly what you were just talking about. You find the why behind the behavior. Most of the time, they're either trying to avoid something or get something. So you're trying to figure out through communication, what are they trying to avoid? What are they trying to get? Then you're going to make a guess, right, based off of what you are finding, what your guesses are, finding the why behind it. Then you're going to try to implement some strategies to prevent that behavior. See if that works, right? If not, then thinking also about the response to the behavior. There is a handout that I can give. It has like all of the possibilities of how you can respond better, and you can have that. And then what you're also trying to do then is you're trying to model a new skill for children. We'll go into that a little bit when we talk about corporal punishment and our beliefs around discipline, because that really is about teaching skills, modeling the skills for children, because what we're trying to do is give them new language, or trying to get them to use a skill that maybe they don't quite have, right? Or communicate in a different way. But it takes some time to go through the process to do it, if that makes sense. Questions on this piece here? So we're going to go through each of those steps. Questions? Okay. Okay. So just something to be thinking about, right? When a behavior happens, or when they're starting to show something, we're thinking about what is that unmet emotional need, or what is the missing social skill beneath a child's behavior? If they keep pulling at you and it really is about attention, then how do I teach them the skill, right? And why is it that they're not communicating? Do they not have the words to do it? Do they not understand, or do they not have the skill to know how to interrupt me that in an acceptable way, if that makes sense, right? Or to communicate what it is that they need. We're trying to figure out what is there a skill that needs to be had, or is there an emotional need? Are they trying to get something or avoid something? Would this change, thinking about ourselves, would it change our attitude and our approach to working with the child? And then how can the adult be proactive instead of reactive? If I know that this is their go-to, and then I know to expect that, then how can I be proactive? What can I teach them before the behavior actually happens? So that it's mitigating already what would escalate, essentially. So just some things to be thinking about. Okay, so this is what we're trying to do here, right? Is once you find the why behind the behavior, however, right, that's kind of why they also put your teams in place. It's just a way to have a conversation. If this is a good time for you all, this is why you need to be communicating with the adults in the classroom, because what you're trying to find when you're doing the find the why pieces is we talk about the ABCs too. You're thinking about what's happening before the behavior. You're thinking about what's happening, right? What is the B? The behavior. Look at what is the behavior, and then the C is the consequence, right? So what happened as a result of that behavior? Because then that's going to help you understand. That's going to help you understand better what it is that they're trying to avoid or what they're trying to get. So that you can do more diving into the ABCs. Then after you do the ABCs, you kind of want to. Oops, test. Okay, hopefully it doesn't die. Okay, then you're going to think of some strategies to help you to prevent the behavior. I'm going to, some of this is, again, teaching the skill. I'm going to teach them how to use the calm down corner. I'm going to teach them how to, if they're having a hard time communicating with their peers, how to appropriately communicate with somebody. I would tell if you do this and you do this consistently, right, and your expectation is consistent with children, because you found out why, right, how you can prevent that behavior, they're going to be able to get that skill. They're going to be able to communicate with you in a better way. Okay, so that's the second step. How you prevent the behavior, you can anticipate it. By doing the ABCs, you kind of have a good idea of when, is it a certain time of day? Is it with certain people? That's kind of why you want to do the find the why. And then some of the things might be the environment, right? Is it those relationships? We want to create a supportive environment that is going to have them be successful in using the skills. So again, consistent routines and schedules. You're engaging them in materials. So if you're building a relationship with a child, you know what their likes and their dislikes are, and you can use that to be able to help you to prevent and get them engaged. Because oftentimes too, right, it's the children that are left to dilly-dally, and then we just let them be in a corner, right? That's kind of where we see the behaviors happening too. So it's what can we do to get them in the space and engaged in the space? Okay, and then there are some appropriate ways to respond to behaviors, but again, it has to match, like when we found the why or the reason behind the behavior, we really want to make sure that it matches whatever it is they're trying to get or to avoid. And then same thing here, when you're responding to behavior, you're consistent. All of the adults respond in a manner that calms the child. You're teaching a new skill, and you're avoiding maintaining the challenging behavior. You're aligning, aligning the function of the behavior. So is it to obtain or to escape from something? And then you're validating the child's emotions. So that's kind of what that meeting is too. If there are challenging behaviors, that you talk through some of this. You start collecting evidence of, when do I see this happening most often? Who do I see it happening with? Is it a certain child that they're having a hard time having a conversation with? There's a certain peer, right? And so because that affects also. So we're taking a step back, and we're really trying to think about all of these pieces when we see challenging behavior. So this is the beginning of the year, right? This is the time to be building relationships so that you're right? Like, what is it that the children need right now? Right? This is the time to set the expectations so that they know how to be safe in my space, right? In our space, in our classroom community, right? In our classroom community, we talk nicely with each other, and this is what talking nicely looks like, right? We have to teach the skills. We can't automatically assume they're little adults who have the skills. And again, remembering that the children that show up to our that are in our spaces, right, that they also come with their own stories, and so we have to build relationships to understand that also, how they are showing up. So the other thing we want you to be thinking about when you're looking at behaviors that challenge us is the pause for the cause, thinking about hot buttons. What behaviors, what types of behaviors push your buttons? This is thinking of us. What behaviors push your buttons? Because this is going to help you also be preventative, because you're going to know if this behavior shows up, I might be a little bit more sensitive than the other teacher. And it's important for you to be talking with each other to say, hey, if I see this, I might not respond and I might need your help in responding correctly, right? But that also, like, if that's where I was saying, like, if it's a skill you don't quite have and you know it's something that's your button, then you want to get some information from your leadership, some professional development to help you build that skill as you're communicating with children and dealing with the challenging behaviors. So these are the steps too, right? We're trying to be preventative. We're trying to ask the why. So the child that keeps biting on, we have the question, right? The child that's biting over and over and over again, you're going to take a step back and do the steps to understand what is it, right? Find the why. And you're going to try to make a hypothesis about how you can be preventative, right? When is it that they're biting? Maybe I need to be mindful of that also. And then you're going to find the why. You're going to try to prevent it, but you're also going to be proactive in thinking about how you're going to respond to that child, right? And then you're going to learn from that experience and keep trying and remembering the things that were successful at getting the right, teaching them the right behavior, and we're not. But we also want you to keep in mind, what is your own hot buttons, right? And is it a me thing, right? It's just me. They can't get dirty. I don't want them to get dirty, right? That's a me thing. That's a hot button. So then that's going to affect my relationship and my expectation. And it's really developmentally appropriate for them to be figuring things out, right? To be independent. That's why we don't do worksheets. We just allow for them to explore, right? A little bit of guided stuff that we do, not too much though, because this is the age where they're figuring things out. And they create stuff that even we weren't thinking they were going to create, right? When we allow for that to happen. But really, again, you're thinking about what is your hot button, and this is part of prevention also. Right? So like if you're like me, right? Children are, they just hold space. They're there, but you don't say anything, right? That's how I grew up. And so teaching children, or teaching my nephews and my nieces to communicate their needs and their wants, that's something that, like, generational, right? That's something that we were taught, and I'm giving them the skills now to communicate, and I have to know that my first response is going to be like, ugh! And I'm going to be mad at that, right? But then I also can't be mad because I taught them to do that, right? But that's kind of, and it's tough because I'm dealing with generations of my culture telling me children are there, but they don't say anything. But I'm teaching our kids, right, our future kids, like, it's okay for you to speak up if something I'm doing as the adult is something, right? Like, sometimes you don't have choice, but most of the time, I just want them to communicate. And that's hard for me, right? So that's why we want you to be thinking about what is your hot button. And then you're sharing your hot button so you know your response. Questions on the hot button? Anybody want to give an idea? I just gave you one idea. What are some of your hot buttons?
So my 4-year-old daughter, she has her own room, and she likes to keep it a mess, and I want it clean. But then the other day I thought about it, I have to look at her eyebrow, and she's setting up her toys and playing a certain way. So then I kind of took a step back and I said, it's messy right now, but she's going to sound like it. It could be messy for a couple days, and then maybe 2 weeks.
But you have to pause, right? You can't automatically react. Part of this is like, okay, I know this behavior is gonna bug me, and because I know it, I'm gonna pause, and I'm gonna think about what's really happening here, right? What's another hot button?
One of mine is like the somewhere and like they go so slow. And I figured out, I compare it to like, you know, it's just like kind of blur your vision and I do that with my brain. I just like blur my brain a little bit and just like walk real slow. Because they deserve the time to not rush and just observe their environment, but I was just sort of about that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I like transition and actually being intentional about planning transitions, giving them things to do, but also like prevention is like giving the warnings. There are some kids that need 10 warnings and 20 warnings, right? They need a warning every 10 seconds, right? And then there are some kids that they're okay with not, right? But that's you building a relationship to know what kind of transition is going to be successful for them, right? Knowing very well that trying to rush is not going to help because it just won't. Right? But part of that is, again, it's on the adults to set up the environment so they can be successful in transitioning successfully, right? In understanding what is their hot buttons too, right? So that it is on the adults. And what happens when both the adult and the child have a hot button moment? You all know what's happening in your brain? How many of you, when you get angry, are you thinking with your frontal lobe? It's hard to make decisions. This is why it's important for us to communicate with each other. I know that this is gonna probably like flip in your lid, right? That's what we're using, like it's your part of the brain. You're being able to be reasonable. I am very unreasonable when I'm in the middle of it, right? Flip your lid. And so what we're thinking about here is like, if I know that this is gonna be stressful for me, right? And I know I'm gonna revert back to what I am comfortable with, which is not allowing them to say anything, right? Because this is like a learned behavior. I have to be very intentional about pausing and letting the kids talk, right? It takes some time to do that. But there are times where sometimes I might flip my lid. And so then what's happening for the child and what's happening for the teacher? Or just the adult? What's happening when you both flip your lid? Is anything productive gonna come out of that? Right? This is why we need each other also. Because like we can't reason sometimes, so that's why we need to call each other out also. This is what we're trying to talk about. Okay, what are some strategies that you could use in the moment to bring your lid down? Besides calling each other out, anything that you can think of? Deep breaths. Ask to leave the classroom. Ask to leave.
Ask for help.
Ask for help.
Sometimes if there's like tension or we're frustrated, I just stop and do like a weird dance or something and change everyone and kind of break it up.
Yeah. If you remember the gap, right? The gap is like, we have this like lesson plan and like it has to be this and it has to be done this way and we're stuck to it. And we're not allowing ourselves that flexibility to be able to be responsive, right? I want it to get done this way. But development to the appropriate is like responsive. We have to sometimes chuck some things out the window and be okay to chuck it out the window because we're getting something better out of it if they're more engaged out of it in another way, right? Not all the time, where it's like they're telling you everything that you need to do. There's a balance, right? There's a balance. Sing a song.
Not play a song on the iPad. Sing a song with the voice. There's something very regulating about singing.
Physical, you're
Very
using.
dysregulating about the iPad.
Yeah. We're thinking about too on yours, like this says teacher, but just as a staff member, when if it gets to that, right? We're also thinking about not just, we're thinking about the unmet need of the child. We're also thinking about you, right? What is it that there's something that this behavior is happening. Is there an unmet need for you also that's contributing to the attitude that's happening, right? We're looking at both sides too. Would it change how we are, how we show up to this space, and how can your leadership support you when you know, how can they also be proactive instead of reactive in supporting you, right? This is what we're looking at also to help, what do you call it, address those gaps that are happening, because it happens at each level, right? Is there something your fiscal person can give you the money so that you can be successful at, right? That's something that we're also looking at. All of the things that you need to be successful, what is that unmet need that you have as a teacher also? This is part of what your program is trying to do in establishing a culture of safety, because we really want to be thinking about that. What we're at, the strategy here is that if you know you're trying to be preventative, you know how things affect you when you show up, that you pay attention to your body, to your own behavior, to your own thoughts, your own feelings. You use those as a signal. You take extra effort to remain calm or take a break. You ask for help. You take time for some additional observations. Know that sometimes, right, I may have, like in that find the why and all of those things, right? Sometimes it takes a while to get through that process. And being patient in the process to understand what is the unmet need there for the child or even for the teacher, right? Why do I always have to have a clean classroom, right? And think about what is that unmet need there too. And it takes a while. I'm saying this as a strategy is not easy. And your program is working on giving you the space to pause and think and reflect, right? This is your space to start thinking about what are your hot buttons and who do I need to talk to about my hot buttons so that I can, right, I can help co-regulate, right? Even as adults, we still need to co-regulate. Anybody have a bad day and then go talk to your friends and, right? Same thing. We're asking you to do the same thing. Okay, so here's the teaching of the skills piece. When you're responding to behaviors that challenge the adults, some ideas for what you could be teaching, the emotional literacy. So you have conscious discipline. And what we're trying to get you to do here is like, if you're gonna have a cozy corner, or you're gonna do whatever it is that you do in your little cozy corners, you are first going to teach the children how to use that space, when they would use that space. Think about all the skills that they need to be able to use that space. We want them to have good peer-to-peer interaction. And we want to pause and teach them those skills for what does that look like. So your conscious discipline has those, right? Does it have like a chart for you that's like, you can give the kids and they're like, how do you problem solve? Does that have that chart? I'm not quite sure with conscious discipline. You all know? So like what we're trying to do again, prevention is teaching them skills, teaching them expectations. So that's what these are here. We encourage you to use real faces, real children, so that that just is more developmentally appropriate than the fake ones. Sometimes we want you to try to use the real ones. Okay, also teaching them how to regulate. Teach them what it looks like when they flip their leg. And you can do this appropriately before or even after as a part of healing, right? That you don't just let it go, you come back and you address the skill, and you teach the skill, and you talk to them about what was happening there. Some kids, right, and again, even for that conversation, we still need, that's a skill that the children need to have. Like, it's okay to talk about it, right? How do we talk about it? And remembering and thinking about that too. So we're teaching self-regulation. Let me see what else. It develops within nurturing responsive relationships. Again, you have to build the relationships to do that. It's the ability to calm down and respond when you're angry or upset. It's a skill that can be taught, it can be modeled, it can be practiced. And so when you're thinking about like, oh, it's that child, it's the child that keeps doing it, right? These skills, you can model it and you can teach it. It takes consistency and it takes time. I'm telling you, I started with the program and it took a little while, but a kid that used to bite and hit and kick every minute When that teacher was consistent, when that teacher knew and had the supports to pause and walk away, when they had conversations, when they did the finding the why, when they did all of that, at the end of the year, I visited that classroom again, and a kid grabs something from that child, and the kid who usually had a different type of communication, he sat there and he's like, that is not being a good friend. That is the skill, right? But it took months and months and months of teaching and being consistent. And even in the little things that you do, every single time that you're there with a child, you're having a bonding moment, I call it, right? That is an opportunity to be teaching, to build a relationship so that you can get to that point. But know that it takes time and it takes patience and it takes you knowing yourself, right, to be able to know how you're going to show up for that kid and teach that kid. Okay, other new teaching skills is how to solve problems. Remember, they're going to need your help to do that, so that's a skill that you want to be mindful of because this is also where we see that gap, right? Teaching, thinking about language. This is also when you're thinking about class. 6s and 7s, what makes it into 6s and 7s is that you're not just telling them, stop doing that, right? Don't do that. You're giving them but you can do this. And here is what it looks like. You're taking the time to teach the skill, right? And to talk them through the skill. That's a higher level interaction with child or with children. Okay, so again, just a reminder, when you have behaviors that challenge you as the adult, think about what behaviors are going to be challenging, right? Why is it challenging? And you're going to go through this process. You're going to find the why. You're going to take the time to find the why behind the behavior, to identify what is the behavior. You're going to label it, right? Is it the biting that we're trying to stop? Is it the kicking? Or, right? Because sometimes they do several different things with the same why, right? They always have the same why. So we're just trying to collect evidence here. You try to do some strategies so you prevent the behavior, right? And we're teaching the skill before or after. We're not teaching it during the tantrum. And also you have some strategies in place for if this does end up happening, or when it does end up happening, I know what an appropriate response is for this child, right? Because again, they come with their own set of what they need. And then you're going to, again, model or teach the skill. This is how you address those challenging behaviors. And you're thinking, again, what's happening for you, what's happening for the child. Questions on this piece here, addressing challenging behaviors. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, another thing to keep in mind is our own personal belief systems. Again, we talked a little bit about this. And we have a new multicultural principles, and one of those principles is like we're thinking about, again, when we show up, we are all shaped by our culture. In equitable programs, you embrace reflection and change. And so you're starting to get some opportunities to pause and to reflect on some of your hot buttons, right? Or what is it that you need support on? And then you're getting some supports also for how can we change, right? How can we do better to create more high quality environments? And then the other piece is like child and family specific cultural knowledge is essential. So these pieces here, this is a multicultural principle. It's just if you're going to implement and you're going to be a program that embraces a culture of safety, we're also thinking about our own backgrounds. Because, right, oftentimes when we're thinking about, anybody see the iceberg, cultural iceberg, right? Oftentimes when we think about culture, we think about those things that are visible, right? Like the song, the dance, the dress, right? But there are lots of other things behind it. The beliefs, the values, the things that are not said, right? But the things that are modeled. We're thinking about all of that. That is what culture is. And so when you're thinking about that and you have the opportunity to reflect on how does who I am affect the space that I'm in or affect my relationship, right? You're thinking about what attributes might you find more visible. You might think about what are the ones that you didn't even know were quite there that are a little bit less visible and how that shows up. Okay, so here's some other things like your attitudes towards social status, your view on how you raise children, right? What do you do when there's a disconnect between that and the family value, right? We want to think about, be preventative in those measures also. How do we share those expectations? And we're talking to families when there is a disconnect, and how do we find a bridge? Because this is, in our classroom, this is what our expectations are, right? In our program, we have expectations. And then the concept of fairness, thought processes, expectation, your etiquette, your norms, all of these things, right? These are all culture. These are all the things, not just the things that we can see that are visible. There's so much more to culture and to how people show up, or how children show up. And so we want you to take the time to think about that, because it does create a bias, right? We're gonna label it, we're gonna name it. And it is a bias, right? It's something that we aren't quite always sure that it's there. So it leads to higher rates of suspension, harsher discipline for children, especially those that are Black, Indigenous, or children of color. And so being mindful of that also is important, because it creates this inequity sometimes. So this is why we've been talking about all day, right? How does this affect how you show up in your classroom, or even your expectations of children in the classroom? And it comes in the form of microaggressions. It comes, or deficit views, or disparate treatment that children may experience in learning environments. It could threaten their psychological safety and their sense of well-being. This is the effects of when we're not mindful of, and we don't do the work to be mindful of, right? We might inadvertently be leaving children out of our learning experiences because we weren't mindful of their own culture and how they show up. And so we want to do the work to think about what that looks like. Okay. Okay, also we talked about that. So here are those two belief systems. So this is where we see the disconnect also. There's that belief system that adults are in charge. I think Amy also used this yesterday to talk about we think that the supervisors are the ones that are the all-knowing, are the ones that are in charge. They know what's right and what's wrong, or that children should do what we say and follow our rules. That punishing children who don't follow the rules teaches them the right way to behave. Right? There's that belief system. Then there's the other belief system of adults understand that they need time, they need practice to learn how to manage their feelings and their behaviors. They recognize that they have to teach children the appropriate ways to behave. And when a child doesn't follow the rules, adults use their relationship with the children to help them learn other strategies in the future. And so those are two different belief systems. Oftentimes, this is where we're at, right? And we've got quite a few recent incidents that have been happening that have been around this. There's this disconnect, right? Because they have this classroom of this certain culture, and then this is how we discipline in our culture. And so assuming that that's okay in this classroom, right? Or if in a child care partnership where it's like, this one is not quite a Head Start classroom, part of the reporting is now we want to know, even if it's not a Head Start classroom, we want to hear those reports also. And so that's what we're thinking about here too. We're trying to move it, higher quality is here. This is where we want to be. So we want you to be mindful of, how did you grow up? And is it this belief system? Because what is it going to take for you to move into that, right? What gaps do you see in understanding that? And how can your program support you to do that? Questions or thoughts around this? And again, we want you to be mindful of that, because when you're out, when you flip your lid, this is where you're at. When you're too stressed, you go to your default coping, to those default coping behaviors that are inconsistent with the responsive caregiving. And so we want you to be practicing, be intentional, be practicing, know when things are going to trigger so that you don't go to default, right? And I use the example of even the teachers that have been here years and years and years that know, right? Because that's a gap too, even though you know, it just in the moment, right? We didn't do enough prevention to catch it before they went back to their default, right? And again, sometimes it happens, right? So what are we going to learn? How are we going to be better? That learning continuum. Okay. This is
just some steps to help us to co-regulate, pay attention to your feelings, pay attention to your thoughts, your beliefs, and use your strategies to calm down. I really just wanted to get to this video right here that she talks about discipline. So.
But the root word of discipline is to teach, which is just what we're about in Head Start and child care programs. It's about teaching children, promoting school readiness, promoting positive mental health, all those things that help children develop to be well-functioning adults. So really, we are disciplining every single day. It's about providing instruction and guidance. On the other hand, when we think about punishment, which some people argue is a form of discipline, I would argue that it's not, because it's not about teaching children. Punishment is about getting rid of behaviors that we don't like, right? When children throw children down or fight or throw the blocks in the block corner, we're trying to get rid of those behaviors, so we use punishment to get rid of those behaviors, right? I would argue that if you're trying to teach, it's about teaching children what behaviors to exhibit, not suppressing behaviors that are undesirable. And certainly in the Head Start community, we don't ever want to use physical force, because that is certainly not a way to teach children. Part of the reason that a lot of our families use it, including mine still, is because it does work in the moment. You can, if you're worried about safety and a child is running out into the street, you yank them back and that keeps them safe. But does it teach them how to be wary of streets with cars? No. You teach them that by getting down on their level and showing them how cars can hurt children, and you really don't want to go outside of that yellow line, because that's the yellow line that's going to keep you safe. So what happens, and we know this from tons of research, that punishment in the moment does not transfer into lessons learned over time. What works is what Head Start communities do so well, and that is getting down on a child's level and really doing instruction and guidance and helping them to understand things that really does change behavior in the long term. One of the things about discipline use in the United States is that it peaks right at the time when we're getting them in Head Start classrooms. So if you think about it, we're working primarily with children from low-income families. We're working with a lot of minoritized groups, and we're working for kids in early childhood. So we've got this confluence of issues that really makes it highly likely that the young children that we see are going to experience corporal punishment. But we want to give them a very different experience in Head Start. Just like Head Start is the way that you learn about your colors, and you learn about your shape, and you learn about being a good friend, and you learn about, how you move through the day, and all those beautiful things that we give children in the Head Start program. We also want to teach them there's a different way to solve conflict, there's a different way to learn about good behavior, and that is by having adults around you who don't do what's easy, what's expedient, but who really try to teach you something that will last throughout your childhood. So one of the things we want to think about is the beautiful work that's coming out of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, where they are helping us to think about having trauma-informed approaches in all child-serving systems, home visiting, child care, Head Start, child welfare, every single child-serving system, mental health, that we want to approach it from a trauma-informed way, which means that we don't want to re-traumatize children. And my argument to you all is that corporal punishment in the context of Head Start, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I want you to take this back and work with people who may not be a part of the choir, that we are re-traumatizing children, particularly children who are growing up in environments where there is community violence, where there is intimate partner violence. We don't want to add to those children's experiences by using corporal punishment and other punitive disciplinary practices in the context of Head Start. But the root
Okay, so they talked about corporal punishment too, right, the discipline pieces. So thinking about how that shows up to your beliefs and your behavior, your culture, and how we're interacting with children. Okay, last piece, right, thinking about where you go from here, how, thinking future focused, right? Take the strategies, if there's things that you don't understand, you have leadership members, right, that are tasked with supporting you in this work and doing a deeper dive in understanding what this looks like. This is just a really quick overview of what that could look like and our encouragement for you. If there is anything that we wish to change in the child, we should first examine it to see whether it's not something that could be better changed in ourselves. And so that hopefully, like, that's our message. And again, one is too much, right? One is too much. And so please, thank you for all that you're doing, to all the work and the way that you contribute to keep children safe in your program.